Twitch has accepted our stream.
And by the way, I can't find us on Twitch.
Send you the link. YouTube
Okay.
YouTube has accepted the Facebook. Facebook has accepted the stream. Do you have a timer there?
I do.
Okay, what do you have it set for?
55 minutes?
That's good.
Okay.
Okay, when you hear me hit the clapper, you're on the air, okay?
Okay.
And you can start the timer.
Okay. Peace and greetings. You are now listening to Talking Peace. I'm your host, Deidra EmEl, Executive Director of the Western New York Peace Center. And so tonight, we're going to talk about, today and tonight, we're going to talk about Black women in leadership in traditionally white organizations or majority white organizations, and the trend that's happening and the changes and so on that's happening, and including with the Western New York Peace Center. I would love to welcome our guest, Gabrie'l Atchison, which is Dr. Gabrie'l Atchison, Professor of Women's Studies and Economic Justice Issues, and also one of our wonderful board members of the Western New York Peace Center, and all around just great friend and ally. So welcome, Gabrie'l.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. We also like to just give thanks for just the world that we live in, and we give thanks for all those who continue to just work, and just a part of the 98%, and from slavery to now. We just want to give thanks for all those who continue to labor in this system and labor to change it. And so we just give thanks for that. And so I wanted to go into what values we bring to the table when we're discussing this topic. I'll start with you, Gabrie'l. What values you want to bring to this conversation tonight?
I guess the value of just listening and compassion, honor of ancestors, honor of ourselves, self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-care. Here's a radical,
yes.
Event, I tell you. And I also want to just thank you to say thank you to Richard Wicca, our producer of Think Twice Radio, and of course WBNY 91.3 FM. On Mondays, you can listen in on Talking Peace. So I think that I want to bring the values I want to bring to this conversation. I guess it's consideration, and cohesion. Like how to become one, how to come together, even when it seems like you're worlds apart. And yeah. So let's tell the audience more about yourself, Gabrie'l. Just a little bit of your background, and you're also the president of the Black Episcopalian Union as well. So I want to talk a little bit, about how you became the president of such an organization, and one white gentleman told me, he said, "Wow, I didn't know that there were Black Episcopalians." And he was just like, "Wow, that's awesome." But I didn't even know, he said, my whole congregation is mainly white. He was Episcopalian. And, so he just thought that was so awesome. But, again, not so heard of. So I wanted to, just kind of delve in more of your background and how you got, to be the president of such an organization.
Press my camera does something weird.
That's okay. Do what you can. Do what you got to do.
All right. So I was actually born in the Bronx. I spent most of my youth as a Baptist. So I grew up in the Baptist church. I have a background in African American studies, and then I moved into women's studies because my area of interest was women, Black women, and Black girlhood. So it overlapped. I became part of lots of different feminist organizations that did some writing. And then I went back to school for a master's in religion. And by the time I moved to the Buffalo area about 6 years ago, I became involved with the Trinity Episcopal Church as a staff person. And when you become part of the Episcopal Church, you just kind of get in, you just stay involved. There's just a lot of things going on. People are excited about activist work. And so it was a good match for me. I met a man named Wayne, who was the president of our chapter. And I think we'll talk about the organization a little bit later, but he was the chapter president, and they wanted a seat and a voice at the table for the convention that happens annually. And
Convention?
Yeah, there's an annual convention of the diocese, and they wanted a seat and a voice at the table, which makes a lot of sense. And there are people within the Episcopal Church in our local area who are like that person you talked about, who don't know that they're Black Episcopalians, and some who probably feel like, people shouldn't call themselves Black. The question I get most of the time is, why is there a Black Episcopalian when there's no white Episcopalian? So we can unpack that later. But basically, he needed my help, where I inserted myself, and at the end of the day, he said, "Would you like to be the president of our chapter?" And how he hooked me was because he wanted to work with young adults, and that's a group that I'm very much interested in working with. So this is my third year that I'm being the president of our chapter. The Union of Black Episcopalians is a national organization with about 55 chapters. Some are in the US, some are in the Caribbean and Africa. And our chapter is Buffalo. So I'm the president of our chapter.
Wow.
Keep my cameras working.
There you are. Wow, that's very interesting. And so, the gentleman wanted a voice at the table. Was he the president before you were?
Yes, he was the former president.
He didn't feel that he could have a voice at the larger table?
What he was talking about was a formal vote, like a formal voice, but it's true also that Black Episcopalians are yearning for a voice, or yearning for inclusion.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like you're part of something, you feel very much part of it. Many Black Episcopalians are generation after generation, Episcopalian. And still there's a feeling of, oh, maybe you're new to this, or, we need to educate you about, being this way, or we don't know you exist, or, those kinds of attitudes. So I think when he was saying that, he was talking specifically about having 2 representatives at this body, but I think the way that he expressed it seemed like he wanted more. Just that respect, that there's a legacy here and it's not being honored or respected, and so.
Right. And I don't know much about the Episcopalian Church, but it has had a significance in different African American communities. Am I correct?
Yeah. So when I was initially thinking about this and learning about this, because I didn't know about Black Episcopalians either when I came. And it is interesting because I spent a lot of time knowing about the Black Church, right? So I've taken classes called The Black Church and heard absolutely nothing about Episcopalians, Catholics, Buddhists, any other of the, religions that people belong to. And maybe they're outnumbered, but they're there, But what I learned was that shortly after, early as the 1600s, the Episcopal Church began to baptize African people. So this was something that the fact that there are Black Episcopalians is centuries old. And some people, there's this point in our history where, the AME Zion churches, where some people will remain Black Episcopalian and some people will develop their own sort of African-centered thing.
Right.
And the leaders of those movements knew each other. They were in each other's circles.
The AME African Methodist.
Yeah. So it all sort of comes from the same, they're like cousins of each other.
Okay. And and so what else, why was the Episcopalian Church so significant to the Black community or to certain Black communities?
Yeah, it seems like, so there was, while there are people who were enslaved, there were free communities and they formed their own institutions, and some of them formed their own Episcopal churches. And some people were inside the Episcopal churches, but were segregated inside. So once freedom happened, people didn't want to be segregated. They believed in what the Episcopalians were saying, even if it didn't include them. So they felt like, we're going to make our own churches. And I don't think they initially wanted them to be Black churches. I think they wanted them to be places of equality. And they probably imagined that, it would be interracial, because they believed in what the Episcopalian Church was saying about brothers and sisters in Christ and those things, even when they were not being included, socially. They believed in it. And so it's almost like a dedication to it. And I think that dedication is present now. I think a lot of Black Episcopalians stick in there, even though they're, overlooked, and sometimes they're just one or two in a large white congregation, because they tend to believe in what the church stands for, even when it doesn't sort of meet up to its what it says.
Right.
So I think that's what they were thinking. Like, we're going to form our own church and hopefully show the white churches that we can be together. Unfortunately, it didn't work like that, but I believe that that's what they wanted to do. Yeah.
What is your challenge? What are some of your challenges now? Now that it's been 3 years, you're kind of in a more of a intimate circle, but more of the leadership. What are some of the pros and cons, I guess, you've discovered, and what do you think, needs to happen going forward?
So what's hard now is that across the board, young adults are not interested in traditional religion. So a similar thing is happening. It's not about race or even the Episcopal Church, but just in general, younger people aren't going as much. And so we have an aging population, and, struggling to try to be relevant to a younger generation, but I'm not sure it's really, doing that well. So I think that there's going to be a challenge about how to have a future when your group is aging and, it's not sort of moving forward, just like all churches would need to do. And there's also a lot of pushback at the same time that there's like a lot of awareness, George Floyd and the more recent issues around police brutality and those things, bring an awareness of race to the white Episcopalians. There's also a pushback of like, why are you separating yourself out? There's a book that came out about why do all the Black kids sit together in the cafeteria? So it's a similar kind of thing where it's like, well, why separate yourself out and call yourself Black? So that's a very real challenge that people have to, talk to their white colleagues about, like why in a racist environment, why do Black people need an affinity group inside? If you're outnumbered, you feel like you need an affinity group. And not every Black Episcopalian is going to want a union of Black. They might want to feel more like I'm integrated. I'm not part of something that's separate, and that's fine. So there's always like 2 or 3 different kinds of ways people are reacting or responding to racism. So those are like, at this point, just we had COVID. So there was a whole year where people weren't sure whether they wanted to, do anything. They had to learn Zoom. So there were things, that all religious and secular organizations are struggling with. But that aging thing is something I'm not sure how you overcome, in churches and everywhere really.
Yeah, everywhere. I just heard of another organization in Buffalo that's been around since the 70s that, just closed its doors, that had, community gardens. They had, a lot of events and activities going on for years, and they didn't have enough volunteers. And so they decided to, close the whole organization.
Yeah.
Property, everything. So, yeah, I think it's across the board, and as you know, that's one of our challenges with the Western New York Peace Center. Dedicated, wonderful, individuals, been around literally since its inception, in
Right.
1967, 68, members who are still members, were around. So 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, they have been here with us, and, bringing in a new generation and more multicultural, connection is definitely our challenge. So when you, what were your thoughts when you start to get to know the Peace Center, as a whole, and kind of seeing, we're made up of, of and some of our changes?
So my first encounters with the Peace Center was Amy Goodman came to do your thing.
Okay.
And I looked around and I thought, this is my tribe. Like, these are my folks, And it has some overlap. There's some people from the Episcopal Church who are part of that circle. But yeah, like before I came, I used to live in the Boston area after the women's studies degree, and I was doing my feminist activism. And I was part of a community called the Women's Center. And so I often forget and call you guys the Women's Center because it has that same vibe to it. Like the Women's Center was a space where a lot of the conversation that we're having now were happening. A lot of socialists there, a lot of things around violence against women and anti-war, and the same conversations that we're having. But they also created they had like a living room, and people could come in and make their signs, and so it has that same kind of energy. Is so when I arrived, I thought, okay, this is the group that I would like to be involved with. And I mean, I'm not as concerned with it's gonna sound strange. I'm not as concerned with the fact that an organization is predominantly white as they are that I am Black. So I'm, if you're working with me, I don't care. Like let's do it. Let's roll up our sleeves and do it. But yeah, you have to know that everybody there well, not everybody, but most people there may feel a certain way because you are Black and you're the only Black one in the room or whatever. And so that's something that that was a learning curve that I had to get. With activist work, most of the time people are able to just roll up their sleeves and get started. But with us here in the Buffalo area, it seems like it's a little bit tougher to just sort of do that. We almost have to take a step back and say, oh my gosh, it's a Black person. And then we have to go over what that is. And, whatever, like I had to say something special or do something special because you're here, and it's like, relax because it's okay.
Right.
But I'm even getting used to that because I know it, most of the time it's coming from a good place. It's just, it can get tiring. It can get exhausting.
Yeah. And I, sometimes I do feel for our white brothers and sisters because, they, it's, awareness comes, you know, you don't want to continue to step on the same shoe. You know, you don't want to keep
Right.
you know, you don't want to keep offending.
Right.
Time you don't know how to be yourself.
Right.
Oh, and at the same time, it's just like, okay, well, what, you know, what's my new and improved awareness
Right.
look like? And it's just like you said, you know, it's being people. You know, we're human. We're all having a human experience.
Right. Right.
And you know, one thing I have to remind people, whoever's mad at whoever, that we did not choose the color of our skin. The majority, 99% of humans on Earth. Now, if anybody had a skin disease, it's a whole nother story. Vitiligo,
Right.
you know, but they still
Yeah.
didn't choose that, you know.
Right. Right.
Did not choose what range of melanin, you know, they came into the earth at. You know, that's something that we did not have a choice in. No one did, whether they're white or whether they're black, you know.
Right.
So I think that's something that, you know, we can't hold that over each other's heads, because that's something you cannot control.
Right.
You cannot control, you know, the family that you was brought up in. That was beyond your control, you know. And I think that we have to give each other a little bit of space, a little more room, you know, to grow from that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and to see beyond, you know, those characteristics, and really judge, like, you know, Dr. King has said, to, you know, judge each other by our character,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and really deal with the character of the individual.
Yeah.
Here, you know, to me, you know, I'll work with you, you know, and if you have offended me, first, I always got to ask myself, why am I offended?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it can be something within me, or it can be something, you know, on a larger scale.
Right.
But offense is subjective. You know, everybody doesn't get offended by the same thing, right? And you know, so I consider that, and you know, and just try to give people room to ask questions, give people room to, you know, to feel comfortable really talking about the things that they usually wouldn't ask people.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you don't got the experience, you don't have it.
Right.
You know, and you know, how are you going to get that experience or know what's offensive unless we have some real conversation?
Right. Right.
No, and if I already have my fist up and my brick walls and my, you know,
Yeah.
I can't get any closer. You know, it's just how I feel. So I think with the Peace Center, you know, I always felt, you know, welcomed. You know, I came in through through Latin American Solidarity Committee. Yeah, right. Mrs. Sarah was actually my counselor from high school.
Okay.
And we were very close, you know, like as far as like, you know, I was going through a lot of issues and so on in high school, family life. And her, along with a lot of teachers, were very supportive, you know. And so to make a longer story short, basically my way into the Peace Center was about a whole nother group of people, you know, learning about the indigenous of, you know, South America, and the Chiapas, and, you know, Latin American, you know, Cuba. So that's where my interest actually, was.
Yeah.
And so even though it was basically like a white group, they're trying to spread, you know, this message and get support for these people of color, you know.
Yeah.
I could respect that, you know, I could, you know, really respect that and support that. And you know, and then again, it's about teaching, you know, of character. And, you know, I came into, you know, Camp Peace Prince, and yeah, it was two, you know, older white women with a lot of black kids.
Yeah.
But I was drawn to the idea of the camp, this Peace Prince, this, camp that talks about social justice, a camp that, builds on conflict resolution, and, it's not just fun and games.
Right.
But hopefully my son can continue this road that I'm trying to teach him in a larger group, group setting. So I think that the Peace Center has always been, that's how the Peace Center came together, was for actually to support, people of color.
Yes.
They went to hear a Black man, and they said, okay, we heard the call.
Yes.
We want to do our part, and we don't want, to fight the Vietnamese.
Right.
And we don't want to send our sons and daughters, to fight. So I love that. I love that about the Peace Center.
Mhm.
Because it's a ground, it's a groundwork. But at the same time, still took about 54 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Different, people in office, but I don't think it was like, okay, make sure we don't put, no matter what we do, make sure we don't put nobody other
Right.
seat. I just think it just wasn't an opportunity per se.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long, but I noticed from the board, we've had different, like Jim Anderson used to be on the board, yourself is on the board, Janie Brockington, many, Tally Rodriguez, we have many different people of color, indigenous, and so on our board.
Yeah.
Which I love. At least in the last 10 years, it has been a very diverse board, I would say, which is just awesome. And I think that's the way that's the way we can, I guess, reach a diverse group of people.
Yes.
Even generation wise. I'm like, how are we going to have, a whole bunch of, older people, including myself, on this board and try to reach teens or try to reach college students? Like, they don't see themselves here. And I think that's, a major thing too. People usually have to see themselves in the group to want to be a part of the group. Like you said, like, this is my tribe. Like, you saw yourself.
Yes.
Whether it's what they was doing, what they was talking about, the conversation, how people dress, like, we feel connected in different ways,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think that's a part of it is, in our leadership representation, whether, as young people, whether, other people of color. And, I would love to see, we are a majority white ally organization, but, we're, growing to become more of a multicultural, organization.
Yeah.
I'm excited about, but, we had an annual meeting the week before, and, you were mentioning how, sometimes when you have a change in leadership, especially of people of color, people don't, continue to support.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, and and what what you see with that type of trend?
Yeah. Well, I mean, change of any kind, like, like on the level of a church, and the pastor leaves and then a whole bunch of people leave. But yeah, especially with organizations, like most of my experiences has been that a nonprofit is about to die, and then they'll bring in a woman of color, like right at the end. And then they kind of say, oh, whatever. And then people kind of lose faith in it, or have lost faith in it beforehand. And then, here's your chance. And I don't know if that's common practice, but I've heard that that's happened enough times that I feel like it may be a way that organizations kind of deal with something like a diversity when they don't really, they don't really buy into it. They just kind of want to do it or show that they tried to do it or something. But this organization embraced it for real. And so I didn't see a dip or people leave or, a dip in terms of people joining, people giving their the money every year and that, donations and stuff. Our biggest, my role is the treasurer on the board, so I get to look at numbers. And the largest portion that I'm, looking at is individual donations, which includes membership and just people giving to an organization. So to me, that means that, the folks who are part of the tribe, not just believe in it in their heart, but they actually support it, financially. And yeah, we really did have a shift just in the couple of years that I've been on the board. With the, you and I, we can feel young, but there's a group that's younger than we are, coming in. And that's just really exciting, to me, to see that kind of, and the way they think is already different from how we're thinking. So, an older white board, and we might have brought some new kind of way of thinking or doing things. But this new group that's coming in is going to just, it's going to really change things. Right. And like you said, they're going to be able to reach out to the groups that we're interested in. And it'll help this, we'll be innovative, we'll be, relevant to groups. The Women's March is relevant to the younger people, especially now with Roe v. Wade. And, we had the shooting happen when the Women's March happened this past March. And so it was May. And so it was like a combination or intersectionality that you try to always talk about in a classroom. It was like, here it is, we're out in the street doing it, like feeling it. So, yeah, I've just in the few years that I've been here, I've seen it shift, and yet people stayed, they stay in it, they support it. And to me, that's how you tell, like you look at the money, did they give the money? And they did. So, and that's just one way of looking at it, but that was, the way I've been looking at it for the last few years. So.
Yeah, and I would say, to all, Peace Center members, far and wide, thank you for support,
Yes.
And I would say, a big part of that is, I think, in my opinion, is those that, you got leadership and then you have leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can have a president of something, but you notice in a circle in the meeting who the real leader is as they make their opinion, everybody kind of shift.
Right.
They don't have they're not the president,
right.
You got leaders.
Yeah.
And so I noticed that, getting those leaders, like having them in support.
Yes.
Helped bring what we call our old guard, along and said, it's okay,
Yes.
We're on the same team, and you're not forgotten. And that's for me too. I really do feel it's important to connect to our founders. We still have founders that are still living, and those who've been around. And I say, I need history. I need, what your experiences were. And I'm gonna, I'm hoping that we can archive, these different experiences, in pictures and, stories and, that kind of thing. I'm hoping to do that very soon. So any interns out there, any people with a project, come see
right.
me. A project for college.
Right.
Document, 55, 56-year-old organization. But I believe that's really important, because I do want to honor that, and not forget where we come from,
right.
As we have that and African value system, we have this Sankofa, looking backwards and bringing that history and those values back from the past,
Yes.
as we walk forward. So that's what I'm bringing to the table, like we have to have Sankofa, we have to go to the past, whether it's white, black, or whatever color it is,
Right.
to help this organization be connected even to a new generation. But yeah, so I do appreciate that from the membership, and I hope to connect more, because the thing is, what's really cool about the Peace Center is that it's so many, like, these tentacles. They called them task forces at one point. Tentacles
Right.
of pockets of people that have been holding it down. Whether that's the trains or whether it's climate change, they've been holding it down.
Yes.
And they run circles around me every time. Like, where did they get this energy from?
Right.
But so I digress. But yeah, so I just really love, I love the folks of the Peace Center. I really do. I think they're really sincere, like you said, and really believe in it. What we do. What other types of, why do you think it's a new trend now? Like you said, like, if an organization is kind of dying, they'll try to find this woman of color. It don't really have to even be a Black woman per se, but a woman of color. Why do you think they're shifting or trying to that type of leadership?
I looked up, and all of a sudden, like, all of the colleges have a Black woman president. And that is amazing. Like, and I think that part of what happened was that once the door was open, civil rights opened the door to integrated education. Not to say that, women of color were already through the door. It just was harder. But once it opened, it was like a floodgates. And so right now we're kind of seeing the not that next generation, but that, like, the next generation. People are emerging because they just had always, I'm going to speak from a Black women's perspective, and I'm pretty sure it's similar with other groups of women of color, but education has always been a foundational part of, and the only time that we weren't being fully educated was because we couldn't be. So as soon as we could be, we sort of, the floodgates opened. So I think part of what happened was that, like you said earlier, it was the timing, but then somebody was there who was qualified, who had the qualities that whatever the job needed, whatever the leadership, position needed, there was somebody who was a woman of color who had that, the qualities, who was qualified to do the job. And then on the other hand, there was an openness to this diversity. So I described, like, the worst case scenario where groups don't have an investment in bringing somebody at the end. But I've also seen good examples. People recognize that it's time for change, and they just, there's a lot of people who are qualified now, and it's time, it all sort of worked together. Yeah, I do a lot of different things in higher education, like reading applications for college and, teaching and things. And it there's a lot of women of color just on the move, especially the young ones. There's nothing stopping them at this point. And they know it, and they just are they have a good attitude about things. And I love seeing that confidence. It's not something, I think it's something we need to embrace. And like you said earlier, to make sure people don't feel like we're saying to them, we don't want you anymore, we want this other new thing, but sort of like, we can all be there together, which, like, in the earlier part of the conversation, the Black Episcopalians who started their own churches were really hoping that there would come a time when it was just everybody all together. They didn't want us to be separate and, replacing other people, but more like, a space for everybody.
Right.
And I think that I really take your point to heart that we have to be careful because we want to focus on women of color, not just us, but the white allies. But we have to do it in a way that doesn't say, and we negate who you are and what you bring to the table. And I think you do that very well in your leadership role, because there's a lot out there sort of telling white people that, there's other people trying to replace you. And that's an easy thing to sell to people if you don't do your, you don't do your leadership part right and say, no, actually, there's room for everybody here at the table. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, I'm going to flip the mirror a little bit and say that at the same time, all this great, stuff is happening. It's like that. It's a very sensitive balance of not being of tokenism.
Yeah, that's important.
That's something that crawls under my skin.
Yes.
On one sense, it's like, okay, I know it's only 3 of us in this, this organization. We all know.
Right.
It's nothing to hide there.
Yeah.
And we want to recruit more, people of color. Okay, I'll go with you so people know that,
right.
people here,
Yes.
So get it. I'm good with it. I know what it's all out there.
Yes.
But at the same time, sometimes, I'm not saying that the Peace Center has done this, but just overall, when I, kind of see it, like, like we said, we're seeing this trend happening, it's this, we're cool too. We're in the know, we're doing basically like what is the trendiest thing to do. So let me look past some of the other qualified people because they happen to be white men.
Right.
Just saying. And let's, get this person of color.
Yes.
You don't want to hear anything else that, white man has to say. And I'm like, is that the
right.
I don't think we're, like we're
right.
accomplishing the real goal here of the best person for the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might be another white man. I'm okay. Are they going to do the work?
Right.
But can everybody relate? Yeah, people are looking on the outside, first.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's like that delicate balance of this token thing, and basically, how do we transition and change without doing the same thing that that non people of color have been doing for forever. Is like, oh,
right.
Black person, or I got one Black person in my family. I'm not racist,
Right.
We got 5 Black people in our group of 50, Steve,
right.
you're multicultural. And it's like, wait a minute, hold on.
Right.
So, and sometimes, because of that, because of the starkness sometimes, even people in the Black community, other Black leadership wonders if you are really leading, or are you being a puppet or being a face of now?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that has already in the past year have come to me at least once. And I felt it, I'm just like, it was a struggle. I'm just like, I come from the same, literally I grew up on these same streets. I probably lived here longer than you have,
Right. Right.
The same parts of the East Side. Why don't you trust me? And it wasn't about trusting me. It was about trusting, well, who's behind you?
Right.
Who are you representing? Are you really speaking for yourself? Are you speaking for the rest of your, the white folks behind, like, what is this? And,
right.
And, so and I had to come, that's how I had to come to grips, like, who we are now, not where we want to be, but who we
Right.
are as an organization now.
Mm.
I was just like, hey, we are a white ally organization. We're not a Black organization. Let's just say, with the East Side, let's say,
Yeah.
out of Buffalo. And, going into March or doing something like that, in my mind, I'm like, I'm coming to an old neighborhood I used to live in. I used to walk
Right.
the streets, I used to, dance at the African Cultural Center. I used to live on Riley Street. I used, like, this is my neighborhood. But the rest of the people behind you is not the neighborhood.
Right.
Who are you bringing in here?
Right. Right.
And I was just like, oh, wait a minute.
Mm.
I can say, hey, they're with me. And they say, are they? We know you,
Right.
but we don't know them. It's like,
Right.
oh,
Right. No, that's hard.
yeah, it's hard. So I really, dealt with that this past year.
Mhm.
With issues of trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other, communities of color, with the Black community. And like, what are you doing here?
Mm.
We like you. But it's like, can I be down?
Right.
But it was questionable. And for some people, maybe they're better now. But I was just like, I said, just call me directly, just invite me to the table.
Right.
You'll see, what I have to say about it.
Yeah.
So, we find ourselves in that same position that we may accuse, white people of,
Yeah.
kind of judging the book by its cover, and, and do you don't belong here, but we want everybody to accept us coming into any circle, like, hey, we're going to integrate everything. What, like, you got to accept us. Okay.
Right.
So, how do we feel when, some white folks come into our, a majority, Black neighborhood or organization and start wanting to be a part?
Right.
So, we have to check out, we have to check those situations. And when it is racism, we have to call it for what it is. And, I think deal with the truth and those frank conversations. And at the same time, when it's not, and we're really trying to be on the same page, let's be on the same page. Let's just do the work.
Right.
Yeah. So, I that's what I've noticed anyway in my experience. So where do we go from here? How do we help um these organizations? Of course, they see color, they recognize color, right? Whether they recognize Black Episcopalian,
Right.
union, or hey, this is one of our accomplishments, having the first Black, woman director, blah blah blah.
Right.
So after we recognize color,
Mm.
recognize change per se, how do we help people not,
Mm.
and to recognize human beings doing
Mm.
the work of the good news, right? The work of social,
Right.
right? What would you say to that?
Yeah. In my experience, it's really, and not picking on white people, but I feel like there's a work that needs to be done around like a self-awareness or self-confidence that is not based on just not based on like racial like privilege. So you're you and you're great that you're you is something that I think people of color get to experience it maybe at a church or a social, and like you're who you are, and you get to stand up in front of a church and you say a little speech and people are like, yay, you're who you are. But if your orientation or society is organized around you being great because you're not Black or because you're white, or just something that's more about who you are in relation to someone else, it just makes it harder for you to have like a self-awareness. And so that I feel like is the work that needs to be done. It's like a spiritual self-awareness type of move that's inside white people. And I see a lot of movement in this area. But I think a lot of anti-racism stuff is about information. But what I'm saying is more of a like a psychological or emotional, spiritual type of move inside a personal, very personal, intimate experience inside a white person, inside white people in groups of whiteness to kind of say, you know, we've got all this. There's one guy in my class who said he has a lot of stuff he has to unlearn. I like that. So you recognize, you're at this place where you recognize you need to unlearn some stuff. You get a support group that helps you, and we all work together unlearning some stuff instead of, you know, the other kinds of anti-racism work where you're bombarded with information, which is fine, but it's not helping the person emotionally. Right. And then I think when you can get in touch with who you are, that you are human, that you're not superhuman, but you're human, and that's okay. Then you can recognize humanity in, you know, in other people. But if you don't do that first step, it makes it, you still are thinking about the world as like, there are different kinds of people. Different kinds of people deserve to live in different kinds of neighborhoods. And it goes on and on and on and on. So if we can get to a place where there are more and more white people who can see themselves, their humanity in themselves and in us, then I think we're, you know, and that's a huge, that's not a small thing. That's a huge thing because society is not lined up that way. You have to be kind of countercultural to even have that in your mind. But that, yeah, for me, having worked with lots of different kinds of groups, it's that group that needs to do some more like soul searching type of work before we'll be able to not see color. Like for real. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that, I think we all have to do certain types of work, you know. So for them, you know, it, you know, very well, you know, the case, you know, could, you know, be the case. That's what they, you know, need to do. I think that I've noticed even, you know, for African Americans, and this is in my opinion, that I don't know if you grew up this way. I grew up this way, that when you had a conversation about what happened to you in the day or who did what to you during the day, what was one of the first questions that people, who you're talking to, on who you're talking to, what was one of the first questions they asked? Do you know?
So, yeah. Like what color they are. Yeah.
What color are they? Were they black?
Yeah, or they go, oh, was that a white person? That's
one of the first ones, not like, oh man, you know, that hurt you, you know, you was offended, huh? That's not the question.
Right.
That's not the sentiment.
Right.
One of the first things in the conversation is, were they white or black? And so we begin to always look at our lens is always literally black and white. And of course we have a historical reason, you know, for that very, you know, very easily. And we have you know, how we live and microaggressions and things that, you know, we usually, you know, it's not right in front of us, especially in the North. You know, you got this hidden, you know, racism and prejudice attitudes that, you know, only if you've been around for a while, you know, okay, well, that's, you know, racist. Right. You know, you can pinpoint it. But for Black folks, I think we have to, that information piece, I think we have to be educated more in the sense of, we have an idea of the racism issue, right?
Yeah.
We don't know how it really came to be, and we don't know how it's actually a tool used more so economically.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's really a poor and rich person thing.
Yeah.
My understanding, than in black and white.
Right.
you know. But until we understand history, and know that, you had white slaves too, or, you have white people, brought over here that none of the other white people really want to deal with because they thought they were lower, class and lower brain intelligence, and, like that, everything that they put on us for different colors and the way we looked, they actually felt that way towards other white people.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Until we're educated on a larger world view on what's happening economically, socially, and that racism is just another tool of of capitalism and imperialism.
Mhm.
Then I think we're stuck. We kind of get stuck in our own so-called experience, and we can't
Yes.
understand other people, whoever it is, whether they're Chinese American or whoever, or indigenous. We can't relate because we're stuck in our own trauma. So I think we all have some different work to do in order to break those barriers.
Yes.
Going back to my original question to you, is basically, how do we break these walls down? How do we break these barriers?
Yeah.
So that's what I know. That's what I notice, and I hope that we can do that. I hope we can help shed some light on some new information. Excuse me, some information that people don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
There was black slaveholders. There were
Right.
indigenous people.
Right.
But do we hate the rest of our people? Do we hate? Oh, I just hate rich black people. Like what?
Right.
We
Yeah.
start thinking outside and understanding outside this box that that we have learned. We put in and educate ourselves.
Yeah.
And come to our own reckoning. Half the stuff that we thought we knew, and we're looking at, every white person we look at, and we just growl and growl, like, don't you know? And it's like, no, they don't know. They have never been educated.
Right. Right.
XYZ. Like, why are you expecting them, to know, this, or to know about racism, or to know, like, they was educated in the bubble like we were.
Right.
Bubble.
Yeah.
That's how I see it anyway. And so hopefully we can have compassion for each other, with one another, at least enough to, help each other to be educated. So if you're offended, help to educate them with, and before you walk away. Educate, help to, help people understand, why it was offensive.
Yeah.
Don't just, oh, I'm mad at you.
Yeah.
And because, and that's, I believe that, that's a biblical principle, right? When someone has offended you, you go to them, you tell them their fault. So hopefully you have gained a brother.
Right.
The same thing, even with with racism and microaggressions and prejudice, until we pinpoint and show this is what's happening. This is why you continue to offend. This is why we don't want to sit with you during lunch.
Right.
Or, I feel more comfortable with this group because
Right.
of what, how I can relate. Until we, have those frank conversations, and come to a mutual understanding, I think we can continue to be divided.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think we can do? Because like you was mentioning before about the have younger generation on our board, and but what kind of how can we do